Hi everyone, welcome to the FIA Japan Technology Committee webinar. Today's theme is AI in capital markets, use cases for market trend predictions and investment recommender systems. My name is Bruno, I'm the chairman of the FIA Japan Technology Committee, and I will be your facilitator for today's event. FIA Japan Technology Committee webinar へようこそ。本日の本題は資本市場における、人工知能すみません。相場動向予測及び投資レコメンダシステム実用事例の紹介です。FIA Japan テクノロジー委員会委員長ブルーノと申します。私が本日のウェビナーの司会を務めさせていただきます。まず、アジェンダをご説明させていただきます。So first, let me walk you through today's agenda. After a few opening remarks regarding our association and activities, we will have a first dialogue with Sylvain Forté, SESAMm CEO, on the topic of AI-based market trend predictions. 私のオープニングリマークの後で、SESAMm CEO フォーテさんと AI に基づいた相場動向予測の課題について話させていただきます。次は InvestCloud の Japan Country Manager 本間さんと投資レコメンダシステムの課題について話させていただきます。So, in our second dialogue, I will welcome Haruka Homma, InvestCloud Japan Country Manager, to discuss about investment recommender systems. We will then have a 15-minute panel discussion at the end of the event. As we want this event to be as insightful as possible to everyone, for both dialogues and panel discussion, please do not hesitate to share your own questions using the Q&A chat function of the webinar. オープンダイアログの後で15分ぐらいのパネルディスカッションをさせていただきます。ご質問があれば、ウェビナー Q&A チャットの機能を使って、ご遠慮なくお尋ねください。So, before I start, I would like to share a brief thank you message to the people who've helped me to put this webinar together. Of course, we have the FIA Japan office with Tony Crane, Christopher Laird from Tokyo, who's also vice chairman for the technology committee, and David Wilkinson from Odimus Consulting, as well as our FIA Japan executive committee members for their support and guidance in preparing this event. Now, maybe a few words about our association, Futures Industry Association of Japan, because some of you may not know us. Actually, we are the only association in Japan drawing members from the entire capital market ecosystem. This includes exchanges, brokerage and FCM, banks, technology providers. It includes as well legal and compliance related people. And one of our main mission is to support the development of a sound future and derivatives capital market in Japan. And for that, of course, we also relay and work with the global FIA Japan FIA Association. Sorry. Now, when we look at the FIA Japan Technology Committee, we have one main mission among several missions, and one of it is to help understand what's happening in terms of technology and how technology impacts our capital market industry. So you can see probably here on the screen a few events that we have done in the past. We've covered very broad and different topics such as quantum computing in finance, the use of RPA for brokerages and FCMs, cybersecurity. We looked also at cloud computing and regulatory approach. Now, for today, our FIA Japan Technology Committee has decided to discuss one of the main technology trends transforming our industry, the advance of artificial intelligence, AI, in capital markets. With the ongoing digital revolution, actually, AI has surely moved from what was an academic field to practical use cases in many, many industries. And the financial services industry has surely been no exception to this trend. So that's actually the reason why our FIA Japan Technology Committee has decided to invite some fintech innovators applying AI to capital markets industry and to explore with them the opportunities as well as the limitations and challenges of such technology. Now, without further ado, let me open our first dialogue. 今日の本題に入らせていただきます。まず、SESAMm CEO フォーテさんと AI に基づいた相場動向予測の課題について話させていただきます。So first, we will discuss with Sylvain Forté, SESAMm CEO, about the use case of AI applied to market trend predictions in a broad sense. So, Sylvain, you may join us.
Thank you very much, Bruno, and thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to participate in this presentation.
So, Mr. Forté, Sylvain, may I ask you to introduce yourself and your company, please? Forté-san, Jiko Shokai, onegai shimasu.
Thank you very much, and it'll be a pleasure. My name is Sylvain Forté, and I'm CEO of SESAMm and co-founder of the company. I created SESAMm with 2 associates in 2014, around 7 years ago, and we are now close to 60 people. SESAMm specializes in a technology called natural language processing, which is about analyzing text data extracted from the web in order to find relevant trends for investors. So we analyze billions of articles and messages from the web and gather valuable insights for asset managers, hedge funds, and private equity firms. We also do machine learning for finance.
Okay, so we'll hear and we'll discuss with you big data, natural language processing, NLP, as well as machine learning. じゃあ、自然言語処理、NLP、または機械学習、machine learning、big data という課題になります。So now let me ask you a very first simple questions that we can all see on the screen. Which capital markets opportunity or challenge are you addressing with AI? 資本市場におけるさまざまなチャンスや課題の中で AI を使って取り組んでいるものはありますか?
Sure. Thank you. And indeed, we are addressing several challenges in various geographies. So we started around 7 years ago in Europe and then expanded our activities to Asia, especially to Japan, where we have a lot of clients for whom we are solving problems related to alternative data and machine learning. Basically, there are more and more data sets that can now be used in financial markets or private equity in order to make financial decisions. That includes several types of data sets related to the web, such as social media, news, etc., and other types of data sets like credit card data or satellite data. The advantages of these data sets is that they can bring increasing performance, beat the benchmarks, and generate more revenue. And it's also a good way to collect AUM to have innovative technologies and innovative data sets.
So if I may summarize a bit here, what you see, the opportunity you see is how to leverage what we would call alternative data, new sets of data to create new opportunities, right? So
exactly.
手短に言えば、この課題は alternative data のメリットという課題ですね。alternative data のおかげで、パフォーマンスの改善、または AUM の増加という課題になります。Let me just move to the slides here that you've prepared for us, where I think you highlight some of the challenges, right, that you see today.
Indeed, alternative data is a big opportunity, but also a big challenge. First, there are many data sets, and it's very hard to find the right ones and the ones that will generate value. So too many data sets. In addition to that, a lot of the data sets and technologies are too specialized. So it takes months to create a use case. And then this use case cannot be expanded to another asset class or even to another geography. And lastly, there is too little time to analyze all of that data and to build these machine learning models to generate opportunities. So this is really what SESAMm is solving and what we are helping with our modular platforms.
So, okay, clear. So on one side, if I may try to summarize, on one side, there is an opportunity brought by a lot of data available that can be explored and used actually for new predictions. On the other hand, obviously, if you have to do that by hand, it's a big challenge, I guess, and you need kind of automation to process, analyze, and deduct investment opportunities through data. Great. So that will be probably a good segue to our next question. How are you more specifically and concretely working with AI? どのように AI に取り込んでいますか?
Specifically on our side at SESAMm, we work on two technologies. The first one is text analysis. So we have algorithms that are reading billions of articles online in different languages and that are trained locally. So for example, we have algorithms that analyze sentiment on Japanese articles and messages from social media and news in order to assess whether a specific financial asset is mentioned in a positive or negative context, or whether some retail investors, for example, are expressing fear or surprise. So we have algorithms that are trained in various languages to help make sense, automate the reading of the articles so as to create indicators. We have access to one of the biggest data lake in the world, more than 14 billion articles and messages, including around 3 billion specifically in Japanese. So we have a very good local coverage, including in Japan, in China, in Europe, and in the United States. And we have 4 million sources, meaning that it's interesting to use AI at scale when there is also a lot of data. So that's also one of the challenges is AI is only interesting when you really have a lot of data to work from. So many sources, a lot of historical data, and algorithms in order to track sentiment on assets, to calculate risks such as ESG risk, for example, using that data, and finding ways to provide relevant insights to investors to build strategies and insights.
Interesting. So we'll go back a bit on that specific NLP through a few use cases. Of course, I have a few questions as well in terms of limitation, right? I mean, everyone knows a bit of NLP because it's used on many different engines, even for larger audience, right? We are used to get those automated translation tools and so on. And as we know, as we can experience, it's far from being perfect. So I have a few questions on the limitation, of course. And let me here move to the next way you use AI. Can you explain a bit more here? I see machine learning, Kikai Gakushu. Can you explain a bit more what you do there?
Sure. Extracting relevant insights, whether it's from text data or credit card data or shipping, etc., and finding alternative data is not the end of the process. The end of the process is making a financial decision. And it can be very complex to use alternative data to make a financial decision. So we use machine learning techniques and have a specific framework in place in order to build investment signal, investment strategies. As an example, recently, a few days ago, actually, the Nikkei published an article on our partnership with Asset Management One and GPI, where Asset Management One and GPI described the way that using machine learning, they were able to generate signals on a credit portfolio. So that is typically an example of building investment signals with machine learning.
Okay, so investment signals with machine learning. I guess it's what you've just mentioned. The example you've just mentioned is a good way to move to our next point.
Exactly.
As always, actually, these are very nice slides. This is conceptual. The question I always bring is, concretely speaking, what can we see, what exists, what works? And I've asked you to prepare a few use cases, so you'll walk us through those use cases. So 今は具体的な実用事例は AI はどのように活用されていますかという質問ですね。Of course, it's important to understand what can be done or not. And let's have a look first at what can be done through your use cases. We have around 7 minutes for that.
Sure, that's great. So before we dive into these slides, I just wanted to get back to that use case as it was just made public. So this is a typical way that we engage with asset managers in Japan. So we typically partner with asset managers in order for them to conduct projects to develop specific investment signals. So someone comes to us and say, we want to use machine learning and alternative data to build a new fund, to create a new strategy. And in the case of Asset Management One, it was to build a credit portfolio on 600 different assets and to launch a specific fund. So that's a typical example of a partnership between SESAMm and an asset manager. Fundamentally, what we do during this project is we first extract data on all of the assets that are covered. You see here an example on an American company, Tesla, where the system is detecting all articles that correspond to Tesla, to the company, to its CEO, but also to each of its products, so as to understand whether potentially the company is gaining market shares. So that's an example of more in a visual way, extracting information from the web and understanding how brand awareness evolves so as to predict sales of the company. So that is more on a fundamental basis and also things that we do in private equity. First, extract the data and present it in a way that is understandable.
And these are all, I guess, these are all public data that you are extracting.
Exactly. It's really massive data available from websites on the web, which we make sense of because it's impossible to read it manually. And so getting these trends can help understand things that would not be visible when just looking at a few of the contents.
Okay. So let me move to another example you've brought us. That Tsugino Gilei wa ESG score Kanglen no Gilei desu ne. A use case on ESG scoring.
Exactly, that can be one of the second steps. We now have information on the company. We may want to extract information on risks so as to start managing a bit more actively your portfolio, detecting alerts, etc. So one topic that is very interesting and now has really started to emerge also in Japan is ESG, so environmental, social, and governance scores. So we can, using the system, assess the impact the company has on the environment or address negative governance issues such as crime, fraud, etc., which may be detected in the data, so as to help companies find risks and manage their portfolio in an active way. So that is a type of use case where we can, in an innovative way, find risks on company and specifically ESG risks.
Okay. And I think this one is interesting because ESG is a big theme everywhere in the world. In Japan as well, we've seen a few news article recently on ESG themes in Japan. So this one is kind of interesting. And maybe you can walk us through the next use case as well, because there is an ESG component to it. So Tsugi no Jirei mo alternative data oyobi smart ESG score no jirei inarimasu. Yes, what is this one?
Exactly. This one is an example of a strategy we developed with one of our clients in France at FIA, and where we use these types of ESG scores to create an actual portfolio. So a market neutral strategy and a Euro Stoxx 600 portfolio. So we use the data and we use then machine learning in order to build signals and to beat a benchmark. So to generate additional performance using the combination of market data and alternative data with these ESG scores. So that is really the next step. The data is there. We have these ESG scores. Now let us create a portfolio, a strategy in order to outperform the market and to generate financial performance.
Okay. Interesting. And I guess I'm just looking at the time, of course, at the same time, you still have two cases you wanted to bring or mention today as tangible use cases.
Very, very briefly, I just want to mention that these technologies do not only apply to companies, they also apply to Forex, for example, your DPI rate. These are much discussed topics in news and on the web. So this is an example of a hedging strategy that we developed with one of our Japanese clients. And on the next slide, you'll see an example of an asset allocation system. This is something that we do a lot in Japan and in Asia generally, is using AI in order to find the optimal allocation between equity, bonds, Forex, etc., and build signals, intelligent signals that can help define the right allocation of the portfolio across stocks and other asset classes. So we conduct these as projects and we provide licenses to our clients so that they can use the data, use the technology, and also build use cases in-house. For a lot of our clients, the goal is also to absorb that technology and be able to redevelop their own use cases, which is at the core of what we are doing, and which we think is also a way to help Japanese firms progress in AI, progress in machine learning subjects for finance specifically.
So what you say here is interesting, meaning it means that in terms of AI adoption, of course, you mentioned the access to the data first, right? Which is, I think, critical for the business and being able to build, but you see also that work as a co-creation, meaning financial institutions are in the process learning on how to run or develop their own AI models, right?
Exactly. And we see this in a number of ways. A lot of financial institutions right now are moving to the programming language Python, which typically has a lot of libraries aimed at doing AI. So that is one of the ways that we see that people are transitioning towards more AI-driven use cases, especially in quantitative finance. And we are really part of that trend. Our goal is that asset managers can use our data and our technology. And to do that, our aim is to share as much knowledge as possible so that asset managers can ramp up and really be able to build this technology by themselves with the help of our team.
Very, very good, very good. And actually from here, it's a perfect transition to our first short Q&A session. So if you have not done so yet, everyone in the audience has the opportunity to ask questions. We encourage you to ask your questions using the Q&A chat function of the webinar. じゃあ今から Q&A に入らせていただきます。ご質問があれば、ウェビナー Q&A チャットの機能を使って、ご遠慮なくお尋ねください。And actually, let me kickstart this short question. We've seen nice use cases, very nice use cases. When you look like that, it looks like a bit of magic solution to offering new trading or investment perspective. Now, I'd like also to understand what are some of the unrealistic expectations. When does it not work and why? Not only what works, and we've seen great examples here, but I'd like to hear about the limitations as well.
Yeah, I think it's important not to have unreasonable expectations for AI. AI and machine learning are specifically statistical systems. And in finance, the goal is to beat random. So when in finance, you start to do more than 50% in accuracy, you start to generate money. And sometimes there is an expectation that models will be right 100% of the time. That doesn't happen. And the goal is to gain a few percent of performance using machine learning, using attentive data, to be able to beat the rest of the asset managers, the rest of the crowd that is investing, and to do better than random, which is actually something that is not that easy in asset management and in finance. So the goal when you're doing AI in finance is really to do better than the average. It's not to do 100%. If someone was 100% right in finance, it would have a crystal ball that doesn't exist, and we have to be realistic about this. It's just an improvement that can be significant, but nothing is perfect, and finance is still a very complex work.
Yes, and that brings me actually to another question in the presentation. You've mentioned natural language processing and how you extract insights automatically actually there. One question I have is, we know NLP, natural language processing, still has some challenges. You said you cover different languages, but how accurate is that? How do you know that what you see, what you extract in terms of natural language processing is really what the meaning is about, right?
So again, this is a statistical training process. So when you train a system to make a decision, such as knowing whether an article is positive or negative related to a company, what we do is we first give hundreds of thousands of articles to annotate by local annotators, so human beings that will make the decision on a sample data set and say, okay, this article is positive, this one is negative, etc. Once we reach critical mass, we train a system to make that same decision automatically, typically a deep learning system. So it means that we have the knowledge of these human beings that have created the annotation, and we have scaled thanks to the machine learning system. Again, the goal is to do as good as possible, to the extent that also it's possible to reach consensus with human beings. Consensus among human beings is not 100% either, but we have high confidence that we can do as well as human beings, because it's trained really on the same data that human beings have annotated, and a very large data set.
Okay, I see. And I was looking at the same time at the Q&A panel. I see one interesting question, and we discussed that a bit more in the panel discussion at the end, but what type of use cases have you done for Japanese companies? And we discussed in the panel discussion the differences maybe of AI use between overseas and Japan, but can you briefly answer this one, please?
For Japanese companies, yes. So we work in two sectors in Japan right now. Capital markets. So we work with asset managers on building strategies, like I described in this slide, equity strategies, forex, asset allocation, etc. The second thing is we work on private equity. We have a big partnership with Carlyle, for example, including Carlyle Japan. And so in this case, we help private equity investors do due diligence on Japanese companies in order to buy them, for example. So that's more on the private equity sector. And I'm seeing also a last question on the chat, which is in the blockchain work, which is also a bit different. We do cover cryptocurrencies. So we have around 100 cryptocurrencies that we cover with alternative data. And we do have some examples in that context. And sometimes we are also asked to track on the web the brand awareness and the traction that specific blockchain technologies have, especially in the world of decentralized finance, DeFi right now. For those that are familiar with this, understanding which are the winning blockchain technologies is something that we can do based on monitoring discussions on the web related to these technologies.
Okay, thank you. We'll have actually to move to our next presentation, but we'll get back with you. I see a question on whether you can avoid greenwashing. We'll take this one at the end. So thank you, Mr. Forté.
Thank you very much.
See you back later at the short panel discussion. And I'll move now to our second dialogue. じゃあ次のオープンダイアログに移らせていただきます。InvestCloud の Japan Country Manager 本間さんと投資レコメンダーシステムの課題について話させていただきます。So in this second dialogue, I will discuss AI-based investment recommender systems with Haruka Homma, Japan Country Manager for InvestCloud. So introduce yourself, Mr. Homma. 自己紹介お願いします。
私はこのプレゼンテーション、日本語でやらせていただきます、本間遥と申します。インベストクラウド日本の、カントリーマネージャーを務めております。まず、インベストクラウドという会社はですね、皆さんあまりご存知ないと思うんですけれども、アメリカ西海岸のフィンテック企業というふうに称してましてですね、基本的には SaaS のモデルで、デジタルプラットフォームを金融機関にご提供している会社です。で今回ご紹介させていただくのは、まず、ウェルスマネジメントというビジネスに特化した形で、我々が提供するプラットフォームの中の、一部をですね、今回ご紹介できるかなと思っています。で我々のビジネスはですね、いわゆるファイナンシャルアドバイザーですとか、それから、アセットマネージャー、その資産形成ビジネスに関わるですね、ほとんどの人たちが使っていただける、デジタルソリューションをご提供していまして、本社はアメリカ・ロサンゼルスにありまして、アメリカですとニューヨーク、ボストン等にある。それからヨーロッパですとロンドン、ジュネーブ、アジアはシンガポール、シドニー、東京というグローバルに拠点を持っておりまして、日本はですね、2017年に法人を立ち上げて、現在15人のメンバーで運営をしております。
はい、自己紹介ありがとうございます。So I understand that with you, we will be looking at capital markets under the lens of retail trading, wealth management in this dialogue. So different side of the capital markets. And of course, I'd like to ask you a first question here around the global trends that you are observing in wealth management. ウェルスマネジメントにおいてどのようなグローバルトレンドが見られますか？
はい、まずですね、これもう世界の潮流といって差し支えないんですけれども、今までずっとですね、ウェルスマネジメントといいますか、このブローカレージというモデルが主に、なってたんですね。つまり、株式であるとか債券の売買手数料で、金融機関が稼ぐモデル。でしたと。一部、この DPM、一人勘定みたいなものもありましたけれども、基本的には取引執行というところでフィーを頂戴すると。そういったビジネスモデルになっていました。なので、アドバイザリーとかって話はあったんですけれども、そこは基本的には無料でやっているというモデルが今まで主流でした。Next slide。で、じゃあ今後どうなっていくのか、今どういう方向に向かっていくのかというとですね、このフィーを、取引執行 EXO のモデルをですね、だいぶ縮小して、アドバイザリーというところで、フィーを頂戴しようというモデルにどんどん変わってきています。というのは、このフィーの、手数料、売買手数料ですね、ブローカレージ、フィーで稼ぐというモデルは、必ずしもですね、投資家のお客様にとって、フェーバーな形での提案がなされない可能性があるというところを危惧した一部の金融機関から始まりましてですね、このアドバイザリーのモデル、要は 取扱定の資産額に応じて、一定の手数料をいただくというモデルに変わってきていて、これはもうヨーロッパから始まってアメリカもかなり広がっていてですね、そろそろ日本にもそういった流れが来ております。いくつかの日本の金融機関さんでもこのモデルをやっていくんだということでですね、アナウンスをされている会社が増えてきているのが昨今の状況であります。
So if I summarize here, and as we can all see on the slide, obviously one of the trends that you've mentioned, starting Europe, then going to US and now Asia, including Japan, is a clear cut between execution only and advisory in terms of activity in the advisory versus brokerage activity. So that's a good probably transition to the next slide, because that brings question, that brings challenges, right? At least in the advisory business and also securities business, retail securities business.
Yes, thank you. ではですね、そうなったときにアドバイザーはどういったことを考えるかということなんですね。まずアドバイザーと当然お客さんのことを知らなければいけないんですけれども、じゃあそのお客様にどんな金融商品を提案したらいいんだろう。ファイナンシャルプロダクトをプロポーズするには何をすればいいんだろう。またはですね、行き当たりばったりの提案じゃ制約率低すぎるよねと。お客様にとりあえず持ってってみました。この投資信託いかがでしょうとか、そういったことをですね、行き当たりばったりに持っていっても、制約の確率が低すぎるので、ものすごい時間がかかるとか、手間がかかる。もしくはですね、もう自分でマネージするお客様の数が多すぎてですね、稼がせてくれそうな、要は資産のたくさん持っているお客様にしか、時間をつぎ込めないと、費やせないと。で、そうなるとですね、これから育っていくだろうお客様の、対応がなかなかしきれないっていうチャレンジがあります。で、あとはですね、例えば GAFA みたいな、ビッグ IT カンパニーがですね、この世界に入ってきたら、きっと彼らは得意のデータを使ってですね、パーソナライズみたいなことをどんどん進めていくだろう。で、そうすると、例えば Netflix とか Amazon みたいにですね、履歴に基づいて提案とかをしてくれたら楽だな、という思いが出てくるんですね。で、もしくは新しい金融商品が出てきて、それをどのお客様に持っていったらいいんだろうかと。そういったものも何か履歴からですね、解釈できないのかという思いが当然アドバイザーには浮かんでくるというのが、昨今のチャレンジということになっています。
So I won't say again all your questions because everyone can read them on the screen, but obviously there are new challenges. But as you've said, on the other hand, if there is a way to bring new recommendation that would help addressing those challenges in the same way that we may think of Netflix or whatever, Amazon e-commerce bringing a recommendation, that could definitely help fill the gap. So that's definitely the transition from the next question we had prepared, right? How can AI address these trends? これらのトレンドに対して AI を使ってどのように対処していますか？
はい、基本的にはパーソナライゼーションというのが回答だというふうに思ってまして、今まではですね、例えばハウスビューをお客様にお見せして、もしくはハウスビュー、マーケットアサンプションに基づいて、アドバイザーがですね、経験と勘でいろんなご提案をしていたというのが、今までのビジネスモデルだったと思うんですね。なので、必ずしも、そのお客様に合った提案ができていたかというと、そうでないケースも多様にあったんではないかと思います。で、これをですね、データをいろいろ使って、過去のデータであるとか、その投資家と似たようなプロファイルを持った人の、行動履歴みたいなものを使ってですね、どんどんレコメンドを絞っていくという作業が AI の力を使うと非常に簡単にできるというような感じになってきました。で、昨今のトレンドはもうまさにですね、このパーソナライゼーション AI を使って、実行していくと いうことになりまして、お客様にとって、非常に受け入れやすい、提案がされてくると。で、そうするとですね、アドバイザーにとっては非常に効率いいので、このお客様に対してはこういうものであれば、いくつも似たようなお客様にいっぺんに提案ができるとか、新しい投資商品が出たら、どのお客様に持っていけばいいのかっていうのをシステムが提案してくれると、アドバイザーに対してですね。で、それをアドバイザーがお客さんに持っていけば非常に簡単に、購入のプロセスを踏むことができるというような世界がもうやってきているという状況です。
So yeah, and let me actually at this stage, because you were mentioning it on how recommendations can be bring, let me bring these slides that you may walk us through as well.
まさにですね、有名なストリーミングサービスって書いてありますけど、まさに、このビデオですね、これをですね、金融商品の世界で実現しているというのが、我々がご提供する商品なんですけれども、基本的にはもう多くのお客様がいてですね、で、面白いのは、この投資の世界というのはですね、いわゆるリテールとかマスアフルメントと言われている世界から、スーパーハイネットワースと言われている投資額がもう一人で何十億円というところから、何千万円ぐらいの世界までですね、買う商品、投資する商品は基本的には全部一緒っていうのが、これがなかなかですね、面白いところで、アドバイザーはそれぞれのお客様に合ったものをどうやって提案するかっていうのをずっと考えている世界なんですけれども、それをこのネットフリックスの、ようにですね、システムがアドバイザーに提案してくれる。もしくは、もうシステムが直接お客様にですね、提案をしてくれるという世界になってきています。
Yes. And here, in fact, that's bringing us to the last 3 minutes of your presentation and this discussion, which is, again, I'd like to understand in a practical way, you know, the type of data you use or how does it work. So how far can you explain that? So 具体的な実用事例は AI はどのように活用されていますか？
基本的にはこの左側に書いてあるお客様のデータ、プロファイルデータと、右側は、金融機関が持っているそのプロダクトのデータですね。クライアントのデータ、例えばKYC のデータですとか、リスクプロファイルのデータ、過去のポートフォリオの保有データ、現在のポートフォリオのデータ、それからファイナンシャルプランニングのデータであったり、あとは e バンキングとかモバイルバンキングの、コード履歴、それからこのお客様がサブスクライブしている、自社の例えばメールリストであるとか、そういったもの。それから、例えばこのお客様が取り寄せた、カタログのデータであるとか、商品、情報のデータというもの。で、反対側では、例えば ESG のスコアであるとかですね、ファクトシートの内容であるとか、商品の属性。で、これ投資って話を、今回はキャピタルマーケットの世界なんでしてますけども、実はお勧めする商品って別に投資商品だけではなくて、例えば住宅ローンとかクレジットカードだとか、そういったものも含めてですね、レコメンドの中に入れていくことはできるという状況であります。で、これがどんどんですね、データを重ねていくことによって、精度もどんどん上がっていくということをやっています。
Thank you for those explanations on Masan. Actually, it's a perfect timing as we'll be able to move to our Q&A. Again, here in these next 5 minutes of Q&A, you can ask specific questions on this discussion, and don't hesitate to ask your question using the Q&A chat function of the webinar. So Q&A に入らせていただきます。ご質問があれば、ウェビナー Q&A チャットの機能を使って、ご入力お尋ねください。 And I see we are already receiving questions. I've got though a first question for you on this Q&A. You've mentioned, so we have a recommender system, which is nice. And we all understand how a recommender system works when we look, choosing a movie, choosing a product. One thing is that obviously choosing a movie, choosing a project, it's not a big concern if the recommendation is not that good, in fact. Now, for investment products, proper recommendation is obviously critical. So my question is, in a regulated context, where of course customer protection in terms of investment is is very important, is critical, how explainable are recommendation issued from the engine? So how can they be explained? How can we make sure that they are suitable to the audience?
ですね、まず質問は、要は AI で出してきた、提案をどうやってお客様に説明するのかという質問だと思うんですけれども、基本的にはですね、AI って、どこの AI もそうなんですけれども、細かい説明はできないと思っています。で、お客様に説明し得るのは、こういった、指標をもとに、我々はご提案をしてますよということで、提案の元となるデータっていうのは、開示できると思ってますし、それに合わせてお客様に説明も可能だと思ってます。で、それを最終的に判断するのはお客様側なので、そこでじゃあ何かコンプライアンスイシューが発生するかというと、そういうことではないというふうに理解をしています。
Thank you. Thank you for that. If you want to comment in English as well for the English audience,
sure.
Briefly on that question.
So the question was how to explain the proposal which produced by the AI. So actually, user, the financial advisor, cannot explain all the detail what AI produced, but he or she can explain what's the data source they used for the proposal or the AI digest. Then they will let client or the investor decide what to do. So that's the point. They will choose what to do by the explanation. So I think that would not be a very big issue for the investment, the world industry.
Yes, thank you. And I see some questions in the Q&A chat as well. So there is one question in Japanese that I will read here. 日本のウェルスマネジメント企業は海外と比べるとまだ弱小企業に見えてくるのですが、AI を使う客層は限られているでしょうか？
はい、まずですね、日本のウェルスマネジメント業界が海外と比べて弱小か否かというところについて説明をしたいんですけれども、これはもうまさにおっしゃる通りだと思っていてですね、まだそれほど大きくはないです。なので、これから大きくなっていくというのは目に実は見えていて、ほとんどのメガバンクさんなんかのですね、中期計画なんかを見ていても、ウェルスマネジメントに特化をするとか、ウェルスマネジメントに注力をするというような言い方で、かなり大きな投資をしていくということを見て取れるというふうに思っています。で、じゃあこの AI を使う客層は限られているんでしょうかというとですね、このウェルスマネジメントという業界がこれからどんどん大きくなっていく中で、この客層が特に限られているということはないと思っていてですね、大手であれば大手の使い方、小さな企業さんであれば小さな企業さんの使い方というのが出てきてですね、より生産性であるとか効率性を上げていくために AI を使っていくということは十分考えられるというふうに思っています。
Yes, and let me just briefly for Japanese English speakers audience summarize the question. So the question was on the wealth management industry in Japan still seems to be weak or limited industry compared to the rest of the world. So the question was, is the sector more limited, the customer base more limited for AI in Japan compared to the rest of the world?
Okay, so the wealth management business industry in Japan is definitely smaller comparing with other global nations now. But as you may see in the investor relationship page in every mega bank, they definitely say they will focus on wealth management, which means this industry will be expanding more and more in the future. And then AI, in that sense, definitely they have more space to use AI for the personalization of the proposing or advisory business, because otherwise they can differentiate the advisory business from others while expanding the industry.
Okay, so, and actually we are reaching the time. So thank you for answering those questions. We'll go on anyway with questions right now, as we will be moving to the panel discussion, and Sylvain Forté will also join us. So let's continue the discussion all together here. 今からパネルディスカッションに入らせていただきます。And we'll do it essentially in English, but Homma-san also, if you want to explain in Japanese at the same time. So let me stop the sharing here, and let me give me just 2 seconds so that I can bring some of my questions on my own screen. Yes, here we are. And of course, I encourage everyone to continue asking their questions. Use the chat function for that, or the Q&A function, and we'll follow up on incoming questions. And one that I like to bring specifically from the FIA Japan, as I've mentioned at the beginning, we are a derivatives and futures market focused association. So by definition, derivatives products are more complex financial products, right? How do you see the application of AI today to more complex financial products? So either of you may take this question. So again, the question is, when you look at more complex financial products like derivatives products, how well can AI be applied today? It can be for a recommendation on recommender system. It can be for a trading signal or new trading signal detected through NLP. Does it work on derivatives? Might be a stupid question, but just out of curiosity here.
Okay, let me answer to that question. Yes, definitely derivative product will be involved, will be proposed via AI recommenders, as long as the company, the financial company, can provide relevant data.
Okay, so if I summarize, if I rephrase that, from a recommender system, I guess you mean here it's agnostic in terms of asset, as long as the underlying data that we create, that are used to create recommendations, include derivatives assets, right? Is my understanding correct? Okay.
Correct.
And maybe a comment from my side. It doesn't change much, to be honest. When you're doing machine learning prediction of trends, as long as the data exists for a long time period, for example, 10 years of data, then it is possible to make predictions and to assess what the future price of that underlying asset could be. So we've had some projects with clients that are using derivatives as part of their investment strategy and leveraging data in order to predict future behaviors of these derivatives.
Okay. Thank you. That clarifies a bit what can be expected on derivatives markets as well. So, and that's actually a transition to a next question we have, which is, in terms of AI applications, what are the new trends or new demand that you see? Mr. Forté, Sylvain, you mentioned earlier crypto assets. So what are the new demands you see where AI could be applied, maybe as alternative investment or alternative asset, if I may say so?
Yes, that depends on in the regions in the world. So I'll focus maybe in Japan specifically. In Japan, we see more and more interest for things related to alternative investment in general. Strategies that are not just long only, but also long short strategy, a bit more hedge fund oriented. I know that, for example, the city of Tokyo is really promoting the implementation of hedge funds in Japan. And so this shows as an underlying trend. And so more complex strategies means more use of alternative data and more forecasting tasks with long short strategies. So that's one trend. And after that, there are a lot of demand for ESG, asset allocation. Private equity comes more and more. It's a growing segment in Japan. Crypto asset is one, but crypto is still relatively small in the institutional sector. It is growing fast, but compared to like massive trends like ESG, it is still relatively limited in the industry.
Okay. And your side, on Massan, do you see any new demand? So in your case, it's retail driven or retail asset management driven. Do you see any specific demand?
Definitely, there is a demand for the personalization. So you guys love personalization, right? You want to propose something personalized. That will definitely have the new demand, even for the financial industry. And I'm sure the era of people can access all the financial products in globally from anywhere from Japan to can be reached in financial product in South Africa, let's say. Those will come very soon. In which case, the advisor has to personalize their proposal by using those entire financial products from worldwide.
Okay, so the personalization thanks to AI is one of the big trend on one side, and from Mr. Forté we heard as well some specific demand. And there is here on the Q&A chat another interesting question: the roles of humans, and it's a recurring question, obviously, and especially in a regulated industry like the capital market industry. What's the role of human today versus what AI brings, and how do you see it evolving over the next 5 years?
Maybe on my side, that very much depends. We do work with some systematic hedge funds, and we do see a systematic strategy thriving. So where human intervention is more focused on data scientists and quantitative analysts that are building the strategies, but less on execution or discretionary decision. So in this context, AI is driving less human intervention, but like quantitative analysis did years ago. So it doesn't change much. If a fund is systematic, it remains just systematic. In many cases for discretionary investors, quantamental investors, etc., it's more an additional layer of decision so as to improve the human decision. So just giving more information and a lot of granularity that would not be accessible to the investor before that. And often it becomes something that becomes completely essential once it is known that so much information is available to investors. It's kind of like lighting the room. Suddenly having a lot of information, it's very hard then to go back to not having that data and not seeing what really happens in these communities. So yeah, an additional layer of information, but that can be really make a drastic change in the way decisions are made.
Okay, so in 5 years, okay, this is more likely they're asking how the AI replace the human, not just in capital market, but in general. Then I'm sure the AI would not replace the human being within 5 years, because any case, AI has to be educated by the human. So maybe AI can help the people's job, people's task, maybe handling humongous amount of volume of data or those kind of things, but it will just help the human. I don't think it will replace the people, the role.
I see, and I think that both of you refer to a certain extent to what we could call the augmented advisor in your case, Homma-san, or the augmented analyst, or whatever, meaning how to combine the strength of the AI, right, with possibly existing knowledge, and how also to make the models better, which would require to a certain extent, of course, the human action, if I try to understand what you are saying. And actually, that's a good transition to another question I see here. When it comes to AI predictions, how accurate is the prediction? How much can we trust the prediction? And the question is also, how does that compare, let's say, to a 20-year-old professional trader that may look at the same Tesla stock, you show the use case, or Homma-san in your case, someone who knows very much the wealth management, who's experienced and who can bring recommendations? How it may be hard, but how is that comparable?
I think pretty much the same, but I don't think the human can explain, the human with 20 years experience cannot explain why he or she choose that thing if she walk by hunch. So, but a UI, as long as we can set up the source data, the user can use the answer. So the 20 years experience people, there is only one, let's say. But at the same time, like 1 year, 2 years experience junior person can do the same level of advisory job with 20 years old, 20 years experience the human. So the answer is pretty much same, what the outcome is, but the number of people who can do that is totally different.
With regards to using alternative data and machine learning on time series, the goal is in most cases to beat the score of even a professional prediction. So we usually benchmark versus quantitative strategies, etc., in a quantitative way. What we observe is usually an increase in prediction accuracy by around 15 to 20%. So that's usually what we observe in project when adding alternative data and machine learning. So that can have a very big influence when applied to large events.
Okay, thank you. And actually, I would like also, we still have 2 minutes before closing. I'd like to bring one question. We mentioned earlier, I think it was Homma-san who said, no, it will not replace, because anyway, you'll still need humans to take care of the AI itself. So that's right. And that's a good transition to the question, is the current education system gearing up to provide us with the next generation data scientists needed to drive AI forward? And I think it's a very, very true question. What I can see and talking a lot in the financial ecosystem is obviously the access to the right resource in terms of data scientists being able to work today on data and AI and machine learning and so on. It's still limited. So isn't that a blocker to further development of AI from your view?
A bit hard to tell for me locally in Japan. In France, we have the chance to have a pretty big community of students that are trained in quantitative analysis, mathematics, and AI. So we really have a thriving community, and many data scientists are actually coming to the market. So that hasn't been too much of an issue. I think that depends on geographic zones, etc. And I know that it may be harder also to recruit data scientists in Japan. But we are really lucky and blessed in France to have a very good AI community and a lot of new people coming to the market.
Mm. Okay, I see. So you are saying that the higher education, I mean, there are curriculum existing nowadays providing quality data scientists and enough data scientists on the market, at least from your headquarter side.
Yeah, I think so.
As long as my understanding, there is some technology called self-educational AI. But probably with my personal will, I don't want to realize that self-educational AI, because that will end up with the robot will take over our world. And probably someone came from the future and then try to kill someone.
So that's the broader picture, and actually that's probably one of the words to conclude, because we are reaching the time. Yes, we could see here, and I would like to thank you, Homma-san and Mr. Forté, for the discussion and presentation, because we could get a sense of tangible use case of AI in capital markets, be it more on the institutional side, asset management and so on, be it on the wealth management side with the recommender system, with a few words on, of course, the knowledge needed on how to handle AI and how far it can go. Of course, it's something to monitor, and I guess we all need to understand that and see how this evolves, and the new opportunities as well as limitations, right? We've touched based on some limitations. Now, time is up. Obviously, I'm 2 minutes over, so I will have to close this event. Again, I would like to thank both of you for sharing your insights and your use cases. I think, at least personally, I learned a lot, and I hope that our audience could learn a lot on those themes as well. Feel free to reach out to our associations and also to the guest speakers if you wish to continue the discussion. Obviously, there is no problem. It's always good to discuss and understand better, and follow up our FIA Japan webpage for more events. So again, thank you everyone for joining us today. And let me now close and end up this webinar, and see you probably in another webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.